Hi, this is Dr. MJ coming to you from beautiful Boston, Massachusetts. This is the Women in Dentistry podcast, where we feature women in dentistry making waves and leading the industry through the next decade. I am your host, Dr. Mary Jane Hanlon, a former dental assistant, dental hygienist, and now dentist. I am very pleased to introduce you today to Ms. Katherine Eitel Belt. Katherine is dentistry's unscripted communications coach. She's the founder of Lionspeak Communication Coaching and an international speaker, author, and performance coach, best known for helping professionals develop courageous, unscripted conversations with patients, clients, coworkers, and audiences. Katherine is a certified speaking professional, which is an NSA earned designation achieved by less than 17 professional speakers worldwide. Speaking Consulting Network founding member, ADMC past president, faculty instructor for Dental Business Institute, Dental Speakers Institute, and Texas Tech University Dental School. ADOM, ASCA member, a board advisor emeritus for ADU, and a recipient of the Linda Miles Spirit Award. She was voted 2023 Speaker of the Year at the Dental Festival and Favorite Dental Speaker by the 2023 Nifty Awards. Katherine is recently featured in the documentary film Women Shaping Dentistry Tomorrow, and her latest book, Courageous Conversations, is scheduled for release in the fall of 2022. It is now my pleasure to bring you to my interview with Ms. Katherine Eitel Belt.
Katherine, it's so exciting to have you on the podcast today. I know we've known each other for such a long time. We've interacted in multiple different arenas, but I have never had you on the podcast, which I'm so surprised about because you're one of the first people in the beginning that was on my list. So I don't know why it didn't happen, but here we are. So excited to have you. So like I do with all my guests, I'd love it if you would tell us your story of how you got involved in dentistry, what your background is, and what you're doing today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And I think the timing always works out to be perfect. So for whatever reason, this was the perfect time. Glad to be here. I started in dentistry as an accidental chairside dental assistant, meaning I was going to college. I was still living at home. I was going to school at night and had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I took an ad in the paper for a dental assistant. I took the job just as a way, literally, to put gas in my car. And I did not love it. I mean, I showed up and, this was in Texas. So I don't know if it's changed. I think it has, but this was back in the late 70s, early 80s. And in the late 70s, you could pull anybody off the street in Texas and give them a suction and put them at the chair. I was taking x-rays. I was doing all kinds of things that now we would just, not even dream of doing without some proper training. But I got, just trained on the job, and it was just a job. And fortunately for me, I had a boss who I teasingly say, I thought he was old at the time. He was probably in his mid 30s, but I look back and realize he had great wisdom early in his career, because he sat me down after, 9 months or something. And he just had enough. He'd had enough, I think, of me playing one game and him playing another. He had just finished a whole continuum at the Pankey Institute, and he was on fire about dentistry and what we could do as a dental team for patients. And I was not playing that game. And so he had the most amazing conversation with me, essentially fired me. But in the same conversation, he invited me to come back the next day to interview for a different, quote unquote, different position. He gave it a different title, the title of a dental colleague. And he said, I'll never have another dental assistant work for me ever again. I want a dental colleague across the chair, someone who is interested in learning, someone who's pushing me to go to courses, someone who wants to stay into lunch or a little after work and talk about cases and look at models, and that really wants to be my partner. And I hope you show up for the interview, but whether you do or you don't, you're going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. But I just can't go one more day where my standards are up here and you're down here. That gap.
But I love this.
Yeah. And so he invited me and I showed back up for the interview. I literally left with my final paycheck. And then, I showed back up the next morning, got the job, and we worked together for 7 more years. I say in my speeches, I'd probably still be working there today because I fell in love with dentistry. Through his guidance, through his tutelage, through his willingness. Back then in the 80s, there weren't a lot of auxiliaries sitting in clinical courses. That's different today, thank goodness. But back then, I was usually one of a few, or if not the only one, that was sitting. And, I didn't understand 90% of what they were talking about, but he would patiently explain it to me and show me. And so I was smart. I quickly learned, and I learned what good margins were. I learned how to read an X-ray. I learned what I needed to know to be an amazing colleague for him. And it was great. And so I got married in that time, and my husband's job took us to California. So I think that's why I'm not still working for him today, because it was a great opportunity. And that was my beginning. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is such a great story. People do not realize the impact one person can have on the trajectory of our lives. And if
What's so interesting about that is years later, I was speaking at the Texas State Dental Society, and he was in my audience. And I often tell this story as my opening story. And when I tell the story, I don't reveal it's me. I sort of tell it in third person. And then at the end of the story, I say, and that young girl 45 years ago was me. I was the brain dead dental assistant sitting there, grossly underperforming. And I had someone have a courageous conversation with me. And it was probably the first professional, courageous conversation someone ever had with me. And it was amazing. It still makes my top 5. So anyway, I told the story. He came up to me later and he said, Katherine, I can't believe you told that story. Do you always tell it? And I said, yeah, I do. Is that okay? And he said, well, yeah, but he said, I just don't remember it being that big of a deal. So to your point, for him, it was just something he needed to do, get it out of the way and move on. He didn't think of it as a life-changing, life-altering. But for me at 19 years old, it was pivotal. I think I'm doing what I'm doing today. I've done the work. I've definitely worked on my craft and gotten better, but he ignited the fire, and it was pivotal. And so I think you're right. I think it is a demonstration of sometimes, we wouldn't remember the conversation 30 minutes from now, but the person we had it with will remember it for 40 years, for better or worse,
Unbelievable. What a brave man to sit you down and have that conversation, because it was going to help him in his practice, right? So it was going to help him get to where he wanted to go and accomplish his goals, which I'm sure you did and he did. But if he hadn't had that conversation, he would have still had a non-involved assistant who we get frustrated with all the time and just want to pull our hair out. So good for him for having that courageous conversation.
Yeah, and he did it in a way that regardless of, he said, I have no doubt you can do it. I have no doubt that I want you to do it. I also have no doubt that you may not be ready. This may not be your path, and that's okay. You're gonna be fine. You're smart. You're personable. You're going to find something that is your path. And I either want you to go do that, and I'm not mad at you. It's really important. If I'm mad at anybody, I'm mad at myself that I let it go on this long and I didn't take a stand for what I need. This has nothing to do with you. This has everything to do with me needing to draw the line, create the standard, stick to the standard, and just make sure that you're clear. If you walk across that threshold tomorrow morning, this is what you're signing up for, not down here, up here. And if you don't, this has nothing to do with the kind of person you are or our relationship as friends. And I can't wait to see where your career takes you. So it was a great example of, I wasn't in trouble. I wasn't, he uplift. I remember walking out to my car with my final paycheck thinking, why am I smiling? I just got fired. But somehow that man fired me and made me feel better about myself than before he fired me, that's a trick, and he did it. And I have used a similar framework in my work and my coaching now. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I'm writing a book on courageous conversations in the professional setting. And of course, I start with this story because it was a bold example of how to do it right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Before you go on, and I want to talk about your new book, because I am thrilled that you're writing it, and it's so important, the topic. But I want to ask a question. Tell me what went through your head that night, and how did you change your attitude before you went back the next day? Because I think that would be critical for anybody young going into the profession who may be working for somebody that is not their perfect fit. You know, you have a choice. You can stay or go, right? That's always what I tell students, patients, whatever. You can stay or you can go. It's totally up to you. But how did you process that information, and what was different? Did you feel different going in the next day?
I did. And I think it was because, and probably many of your listeners will recognize a similar experience, because I think we all at some point have somebody in our life who sees something greater in us than we can see in ourselves at the moment. And I think when I was home at night, I was ruminating on this person he saw inside of me, which was so different than what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of cracked the egg and gave me a view of something much greater. And I suddenly wanted it. Like I wasn't sure what that was, but I wanted what he saw. I wanted to become what he saw in me. And that's why I'm saying that conversation was so amazing, because he said, I mean, I have no limit on there is no limit on what you can make in terms of salary. There is no limit it all will revolve around what value the two of us can create together.
Sure.
Like for me, there is no ceiling, he said. So I want to never think about a dental assistant role again. I want to think about you as a dental professional, or whoever this is going to take this job, as a dental professional and a dental colleague, and you are creating a career. And if you're interested in that, I will guide you. If you're not, or you're not ready, then it's okay. And I'll be your biggest champion on the side. And so I came back to work kind of going, well, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what would I have to do? And suddenly I was inspired, and I felt curious, and I felt a little honored, like, does he really see that potential in me, And so I think that's how I felt going back in. I wasn't sure I could do it, but he thought I could. And that was super inspiring to me.
Unbelievable. What a great way to start this show. Oh my goodness. Great story. Okay, so tell us a little bit about your journey through dentistry after dental assisting.
Sure.
And what you've been doing, and what brought you to the point where you're writing a book.
So yeah, I moved to California with my husband, and stayed home with kids for a little bit, and don't regret that decision at all. But once they were off in school and a little older, then I wanted to go back to work. And I saw an ad. This was still back in the days where, there were ads in the paper. I saw an ad for a dental consulting company that was looking originally for someone to do sales for them. And I thought, well, maybe I could do that. And so I took the job, didn't like the company, didn't like the people who ran the company. It was a group of men who'd never worked one day in an actual dental office. They came from insurance sales, but not that there's anything wrong with insurance sales, but that's a different environment, And I really didn't love the sales aspect. But quickly, they needed someone. They had a hard time keeping people, and they needed a trainer. Like overnight, they needed someone to fill a spot. And I said, I think I could do it. And so I went in, and I think I was really bad. Looking back, I was really terrible at it. But I fell in love with multiple sessions. I was teaching their program. It was, nothing of mine. I was teaching theirs. But it was mostly a sales program in dentistry. And I didn't love it, but I fell in love with teaching and coaching and training. And so after about a year of that, I left, and I wrote my own program about the things that I had experienced with my doctor that I knew really created a great dental practice. And so I began to teach that and teach my own program. And over time, my program just developed over several decades. And so for several decades, I was a practice management consultant and did practice management for lots of clients all over Canada and North America and the States. And eventually I used speaking as a way to gain clients and got some coaching and got better at speaking. And that led me into a few other little areas. I spoke to several times in the UK to veterinary audiences. And so I've had some little fingers outside of dentistry, but all of it's been around communication. And so ultimately, about 10 years ago, I think you'll relate to this, MJ. Something happens when you get into your 50s. You start to see that the yardstick of your life, the next portion is a little smaller than the front end, and you want to spend it with the people you most enjoy and the clients you most enjoy and doing the work you most enjoy. And so I made some hard decisions. I mean, I loved consulting, but there were pieces of it that I could do. I can teach insurance coding and billing. I can teach block scheduling, but it didn't light me up. But always what lit me up was teaching communications, whether that was better communications with patients or better communications with team members, and ultimately better communications for consultants and speakers. And so I decided about 10 years ago to rebrand to Lion Speak and to only do communications coaching in those three sectors: patient-facing, team-facing, more team culture, courageous conversations. And then our third sector is audience-facing. So we train speakers and other trainers. And that's what we've done for the last, now actually about 12 years. And it's just been phenomenal, work. And, we're sort of known as the Unscripted Communications coaching company because I don't love scripts, but I do love frameworks. And so we teach frameworks for how to convert a new patient on the phone. But we say within the framework, you get to be who you are. You get to show up as your, genuine, authentic personality, because I think that's what patients really want to connect with. And same for audiences with a speaker, and same for team members with a leader or a manager. They want the real person. They just want guidance. And so that's what we teach people how to do. And though that was my journey.
Oh my gosh, what a journey. That's amazing. I just find it so fascinating that at this point you chose communication and, having difficult conversation as the one. Is there something that happened in your life that you had to have a difficult conversation that got you interested in this and you learned to perfect it?
I think that initial conversation was one. I think I've been a student. My parents called me Chatty Kathy. You remember the Chatty Kathy doll when we were little?
Yeah.
I got one for Christmas, and that was my nickname because I think I was always communicating pretty frequently. So I was always drawn to it, but I wasn't always successful with it. And so I early on was a student of, reading books like Crucial Conversations and going to workshops where I learned personal growth and how to take responsibility for what I said or didn't say and how I showed up in relationships and in conversations. And over time, as I grew personally and professionally, I just saw that my results skyrocketed when I learned to communicate at a high level. And I didn't back out of conversations that were a little challenging. And I didn't back away from drawing a boundary that was important to me or holding a standard that was important to me. But it was critical for me to learn to do that in a way that did not tear people down, that lifted them. And that's actually an effort that I think, the reason I think this is so crucial today, we have this huge employment crisis where we're struggling to find good people. We're struggling to retain good people. We worry. Clients say it to me all the time. Audience members say it to me all the time. I want to have these conversations with coworkers or people who report to me or whatever, but I can't have it go badly because if I do, they're going to quit and I won't be able to replace the position. So what that says is they have a belief system that I think I had for a long time, which is if you want to hold a standard, if you want to draw a boundary with anyone in your life, that it's mutually exclusive, that you either hold the boundary and you have conflict, or you don't hold the boundary and you retain the relationship. I don't think it's either or. I think you can do both. I know you can do both. All we need is a little training on how to do that. And I think, just turn on the television, MJ, right? We're in an election year. Debate is tomorrow, tonight. Just watch. It feels like there's an epidemic today of people having the inability to have a difference of opinion or a difference of perspective or need something different and be able to do that with dignity and respect and the ability to uplift someone else. And so I think it's not just in the dental practice, I think it's in society in general. And I think I've just been a student of it and fascinated when I watch a really good communicator communicate to someone that way. I'm just fascinated. Fascinated. I remember watching like some of the best communicators in our times, whatever you think of politically, but Ronald Reagan was a great communicator. And so was Bill Clinton. The lots of other faults, but they were good communicators. If you study, JFK, if you study really good communicators, they were able to do that. And I've just been fascinated with it. And so I feel so blessed to be able to teach something that I'm still personally working on every day. And that it's so fascinating to me. It feels like a good contribution to what would really help people. We mostly didn't get a class in this, and most of us didn't have good examples at home. And so here we are all thrown in together with not really any structure for how to do the one thing we'll do every day with everyone, and that's communicate. But we don't get any training in it. Yeah.
Oh, I am thrilled that you're taking on this challenge, because that's what it is. It is a challenge. And, I think people communicate via perception, and their perception is not always correct. And so, what would be normal to one person and not get them upset, if you said the exact same thing to another person who perceives it differently, oh my gosh, they're off the top of their head. They're yelling and screaming. And what do you mean by that? And it's, how can you have an effective conversation when that's the outcome, right? So good for you that you're doing it. So is the book done? Are you still in process?
I'm still in process. I have, I think 3 or 4 chapters left to write. I can see the end of the tunnel. It's been quite an endeavor.
Exciting.
I really wanted it to be a good book. I didn't want it to be just a throwdown pamphlet. I wanted it to be a substantially good book that I was proud of and that made a difference. And so I hope to have it done by this fall and to the publisher. And then we're hoping that by spring it's out and ready to go. So I'm very excited about it. It's been a long time dream. And, but like I said earlier, timing's everything. And I think it's always perfect. I'm glad I didn't do the book earlier when I had thought I would, because in the last few years through COVID and through so many of these things, I've learned even more about communicating. And so it's going to be good, I think. I'm going to be proud of it.
Well, we're excited for you, and obviously we'll make sure that we put a little blurb on when it's ready to launch. You guys, so that you can get the most spread of the communication, because I do think it's important to support one another for sure. All right, so tell us one thing that people would be surprised to learn about you.
One thing, I'm a country girl. I grew up on a little small, I guess you could call it a little farm. We had big garden, lots of animals. And so I'm definitely a country girl, love to get my hands in the dirt. I think people are often surprised. I have girlfriends who say, they knit or they paint, they're very creative. And one time they said, Kevin, what's your creative outlet? And I thought about that for a minute. And I recognized that my creative outlet is I love to entertain small dinner parties, just another couple or 2 couples. And I love to set a really creative, gorgeous table by using mundane things, things from the garden, things from the house, boxes or books or, and I love to have a theme and really that's like my palette is a dinner table. So that I think is kind of an odd thing, but
it's a very cool thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, the podcast is mostly focused around, young women gaining their confidence. So, when you reflect back on your life, have you always been confident? And if so, great. Do you think it came from your mom or your dad? What happened in your life that helped support you to gain confidence?
Well, again, I think that conversation shows that I didn't always feel confident, and there have been mentors along the way that have definitely helped to build that, and I'm still working on my confidence. I find that that's a piece of human nature, that we gain confidence as we become skilled and efficient and effective at something, and we can see the results, and we feel confident that we can deliver that consistently, whatever that is. Might be parenting, it might be a professional skill or something. I've noticed recently I've started doing some keynoting of bigger corporate events, and while I have been, I remember when thinking about speaking to 50 people terrified me, and then speaking to 300 terrified me, and now that is it's not even a blip on my radar. I love it, and I don't feel anxious about it at all. But recently I was asked to be in front of 2,200 people. And all of a sudden I felt that lack of confidence. Like, this isn't my playground. This isn't something I've mastered yet. And so I felt nervous, and I felt a little lack of confidence. And so I think we're always developing it over time, and hopefully I'll still continue to till I am not doing this anymore, or, gone from the planet. But I certainly did have parents that believed in me and were great parents. And I've had lots of women in my life that have encouraged me. I remember I was in a marriage for almost 30 years that I wasn't unhappy the whole time, but maybe the last half or so I was. But I stayed and stayed and stayed. And I think I stayed for a lack of confidence that I could have the life I wanted on my own, that I could produce that on my own without a partner. And I had a couple of girlfriends that are still friends today that really sat me down and said, "You're like two people in one body. You're this one competent woman over here at work, and as this consultant that we see at meetings and speaking on the stage, but we come visit you at your home and you're a completely different woman. You're not, where did that confident woman go, that speaks her mind and draws her boundaries, and so it was eye-opening to see that I was confident in one area, but it wasn't whole. And so I did a lot of personal work for several years, and finally left that relationship, and really spent the next year or two working on me and integrating. I call it my time of integration. I integrated that woman at work with the woman at home, so there was just one woman.
Thank
And
goodness, because that can be so troubling.
Oh, and so exhausting,
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm looking back, I'm glad I did. I'm glad I have two boys, and I'm glad I was able to show them that there's a better way to live. You can be true to yourself and still honor. I mean, I'm still friends with my ex-husband. He's a great guy, but it just wasn't a good partnership anymore. And so, I think confidence is an interesting thing. It's a fluid. And where we sometimes take some steps forward, and then we recognize a place where we're not as confident, and we've got to work on it. And I think having good mentors, good people, is very helpful during those times, to do that. So
I couldn't agree more. And quite honestly, I think it's important that the listeners understand that, they don't have to stay in unhealthy relationships. I've had many conversations with women who, reveal that it was a big obstacle for them. They didn't know if they could make it on their own. And
Sure.
Maybe that comes from, our parents, our mom's generation. I don't know. My mom did not work outside the home, so she could never leave. And I don't think she ever wanted to truly leave, but I think there are times in our marriages that are actually really troubling, and we are growing as people. And if you're not growing with your partner, you grow apart. And I think that can be troubling. And how do you get it back together? I actually have reconciled with my ex-husband, and we're actually a partnership again.
Oh, we've had several friends that's happened to. I think that's really a good example of we grow as individuals. And, it really is the question of, are we growing in a way that we stay compatible? And so, I was 20 years old when I got married. What did I know about who, I just,
Right.
at that point, you think, why would someone, there's so much more to learn about yourself in those early 20s. And so, looking back, it wasn't my husband's fault. It wasn't my fault. We were just young kids. And by the time I was 40, I had a good sense of who I was as a human being and as a woman. And it was different than what I wanted was different than I wanted at 20. So I think it was just, it really was that. And it wasn't ever about him. It was about me coming into my own and claiming it in the most loving way I could. And so it's always a journey and still is. I feel grateful. I remarried and it's a fantastic partnership. And I feel blessed every day to have, found that journey of myself first and then a partner that was a good fit. So, yeah.
That's great. That's great. Congratulations.
But I think it's the same at work. It's like, it's not just marriages. It's the same, that same confidence or lack of confidence in professional relationships as well. It's the same. Sometimes you have to extricate yourself from something that you think you can't go on and make it, somewhere else, but you have to decide how to build your internal self-confidence so that you go for what is a good fit for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great advice. Great advice. What is the single best piece of advice that you have ever received in your lifetime?
There was an interesting dynamic at our dinner table. My mother was a devout Episcopalian, and it was a very close religion to Catholicism. So it has a lot of the same rituals and traditions and things like that. And so she brought us up, my sister and I, in that faith, but my dad was an atheist, still is. And they were both very respectful of each other's views. So at our dinner table in all conversations, they taught me that it was important that if I was going to have an opinion, that I had considered the other point of view. So I was going to voice an opinion so I remember sitting as a young girl, I don't know, 12 or 13 maybe, at our dinner, and it was during the Vietnam War, and something had come on the television, on the news or something, and I started espousing this, opinion that I had at all of 13, but it had come from kids at school or friends at school, but I was espousing it as my own. And my dad sat there and listened to me, and he said, "That's really interesting." He said, "What do you think the other side thinks about that? What do you think they're?" I said, "Well, I don't know." And he said, "I think it might be helpful if you explored that, because I think you have every right to your opinion. And there may be some other pieces to this puzzle you have yet to learn or consider that would impact that. So before you say something is the truth and the only truth, I just encourage you to explore the other side just to make sure that that still stands for you." And and so I think both the respect they had for these very different, almost polarized viewpoints was really helpful for me as a grown woman to see and experience as a kid, that people could still love each other and treat each other with respect with these two divergent points of view. And also that encouragement that to know those different points of views in any situation is helpful, because always things feel like the truth to us. You alluded to it earlier. It feels like we make these assumptions that our truth is the truth. But it's just our truth. That there's lots of other people who look at the same situations or listen to the same conversation, and they have a completely different perspective or interpretation of that. And so I'm not saying that we always need to change our minds, but I am saying it's good to remember that it's just our truth, that we have our own belief systems, but other people believe what, the things we think are right, they think are wrong, or the things we think are black, they think are white, so it's just keeping the perspective that there may be a balance, something else on the other side that would help broaden the perspective and broaden your understanding is super important.
I couldn't agree with you more. I actually love that piece of advice. I think that is critical, because so often we just spurt out, how we think about it. Well, yeah, you gotta consider the other side. Absolutely.
And I think, it's easy for parents or even bosses. But it's easy for us to want our children or want our friends to believe the same things we believe, and we go into the conversations trying to convince them that we're right. And what Dad was teaching me earlier, I think that piece of advice was, I don't need you to believe what I believe. You might believe what your mother believes. You might believe what I believe. You might believe something completely different from both of us. I'm encouraging you to have your own opinion. I'm just encouraging you to do a little homework before you decide what your opinion is, before you decide what is right. Talk to some different points of view. Do a little reading. Don't just listen to your friends at school, because they're typically parroting what their parents are saying.
Parents, exactly.
Yeah. And, think, in other words, his advice was think for yourself and get fully, do a little homework before you decide this is true for me. And it was great advice in my life. Yeah.
Awesome. Is there someone in dentistry that inspires you today?
Oh, so many. Linda Miles stands out as a great mentor to me.
Absolutely.
I was a baby, and she just took me under my wing and was probably the second really important person that saw something bigger in me. I was already consulting and I was already doing a little bit of speaking. I don't think I was very good at it at all. But she saw something in me and said, you have something. You can do some really important things in this industry. Here's some things that I would encourage you to get better at. And she was just a great mentor for me. I've also had some colleagues that have been really impactful. Some that come to mind are Melinda Hereford. I don't know if anyone knows her, but she's a consultant in Northern California, really good friend and been a great mentor for me. And Gordon Christensen actually I've done a lot of work with him, videos with him, and I admire his determination to be honest and balanced and really highly professional. So I think that there've been so many.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Who has made the biggest impact on your life?
I would have to say my father. He's still living. I still independent and wonderful important in my life. Just a steady, thoughtful, well-read, loving force in my life.
Awesome.
I would say, yeah. And I feel so fortunate. I mean, I had a good mother too, but a little more emotionally volatile, a little, so just fabulous. But in terms of having such a positive, ongoing thread through my life, no doubt it would be my father.
Oh, that's awesome. How old is he now?
85.
Oh, so good that you still have him. That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Have you ever had an aha moment where you realized, oh my gosh, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing?
Yes.
Most people have.
Yeah. It was on stage and my slideshow that I'd worked on did not work. The AV failed. It was a 2-hour presentation and it failed early in the presentation. And I had a decision to make. I had to either panic and stop and wait for them to, figure it out, or just move on. And I remember the switch flipping inside that said, you do not need these slides. You know this. You live it. You teach it. Forget the slides. Just talk to them. Just, like you would if you were all sitting around having a glass of wine and somebody said, tell me about, what do I do when, and so that moment where I realized it was in me, and I still use slides, but no longer after the moment do I let the slides deliver the message. I deliver the message. And it's different. Audiences are different. Or maybe like, during and post COVID, there were stresses and anxieties and conversations were different. So I could give the same lecture, but I had to flex it to what was in that audience at that moment. Now that's dissipated, and now what's in the audience is an overwhelming stress about being fully staffed and maintaining high standards, as I alluded to earlier, with people when they're worried about them leaving. And so how do we deal with these new generations that have different expectations at work, and how do we manage all of that from a leadership perspective? And so that moment freed me to know that I had something to contribute, that I could be solidly in the moment and speak genuinely and authentically from my own knowledge and experience. It would be valuable, and to connect with the people that were right in front of me. And that was a turning point for me.
I bet that was probably one of the best presentations you ever gave.
It was. And, I had people say, we were worried, but it ended up being fantastic. And I've also had times since then where maybe the slides were fine, but my time was cut in half. Maybe the speaker before me, went way over, or something happened, where I only got maybe half of what I'd been promised. And in the past, I would have panicked, and I would have tried to have speed talked my way through all of the data, fire hosed people with everything I planned. And now I just relax and say, okay, well, I have 20 minutes instead of 45. So I'm just going to go up a level, still give them the whole picture, but we're not going to give as many stories, not as much detail. And we're going to just relax into what is. We're not going to fight against what is. We're going to embrace it and go with it. And those end up being the best speeches that I give every time.
I knew it right away when you were talking. I knew that was going to be the best one, because when you're authentic and you're up there and you did not flinch in front of an audience, that audience is like, oh my God, you go, girl, right?
Yeah.
And so they're much more engaged, I think. And instead of paying attention and connected, instead of paying attention to those slides up on the wall, they're paying attention to you, and they're getting to know you as a human. I love it.
I think it reminded me that, whether I'm teaching telephone skills, that they don't have a slideshow to guide their conversation with this new patient on the phone. They have to be able to organically do it in the moment with whatever shows up on the other end of that phone line. And same with a courageous conversation with culture and team and leadership. If someone stops you in the hallway and says, I want to talk to you today before we go home, because if that girl's here tomorrow, I won't be. Like that's just going to fall in your lap as a manager, and you're not going to have a slideshow to look at to handle that conversation.
Right.
And so it was important. That moment reminded me that it's important that I convince this audience they don't need the slideshow. I don't need it. They don't need it. They can't have it.
Yeah.
So I have to show them they don't need it, that they can be brilliant in those moments without it. And that's the essence of what I'm teaching, is if you know this simple framework, this little 3 or 4 part framework, if you can just memorize that, then when you're thrown into these conversations, you will be able to do well. And you won't need anything other than that framework to hold you steady and create confidence for you. So it was a moment of multiple awarenesses that it was actually essential that I prove to the audience one way or another. One of the ways I do it now is I'm teaching courageous conversation system. I'll teach it, and then I'll do demonstration. So I ask for audience volunteers to just volunteer a situation that's currently going on for them, and they tell us about it. And then in front of the audience, I step into their voice and I say, if I were you faced with that situation you just described, here's how I would use what I just taught you in my own conversational way. And so I demonstrate it right there in the room. And I ask them to be the other person that they're in conflict with. I say, you be them, I'll be you, and I'll show you how you could use this framework. And I do several of those. And the audience loves that. I almost think they're waiting, like, is the train going to wreck? Like, is she really going to be able to do it? Because it's clear that I haven't practiced with this person, that this is, off the cuff. But isn't that how conflict's going to come anyway? It's going to come off the cuff. And so I find that they move from, I kind of like what you're saying, to I'm a believer of what you're saying. When we do those demonstrations, you can see them shift into belief. And then when I put them in their own, when I give them partners and they get into their own practice, they go much more willingly and much more confidently, because I think they're believers.
Absolutely. Wow, great conversation. Have there been any obstacles that in your life that you've had to overcome that you're really proud of?
I would say two. One was just a very common one, and that is that I had some imposter syndrome, especially early in consulting. I'm not a dentist. I'm not a hygienist. I'm not a dental practice owner. And so here I was in my late 30s, early 40s, consulting with dentists that were practice owners and clinicians and hygienists, coaching hygienists on how to speak with their patients and present treatment to their patients. And I'm not any of those things. And so I had a lot of initially this imposter syndrome inside. Who am I to do this? And it got in the way in the beginning. And then I told you I've done quite a bit of therapy and counseling and personal growth work. And I remember one of the best coaches I had said, well, what if you never went in ever trying to ever put yourself out there as that what are you good at? And I said, well, I'm really good at communication, and I'm really good at looking at situations that seem complex to them and simplifying it. I can get to the core of what's missing. And she said, then that's what you go in as an expert. And what you say right off the bat, I'm not a dentist. I'm not a hygienist. I'm never going to counsel you on, what teeth to prep or what, probing depths to scale. I'm not gonna, that's not my area of expertise, and I'll never talk about those things. What I am good at and what I do practice every day and have had measurable success in is how to communicate that to your patients, and how to communicate with each other, and how to run a small business, and manage and lead inside of it. I've done all those things, and that's the expertise that I can bring. And so once I got that was all I was claiming to be and nothing more, then that imposter syndrome kind of got dissolved. But that was a hurdle, and I think a lot of women in particular, though I think men also deal with it, but I think women in particular, especially if a lot of the women that I really honor that came into dentistry when it was a male-dominated industry, it was easy to slip into imposter syndrome, and I think a lot of the environments fostered it early on. And I'm thankfully, I think that is changing or has changed, but I think it's not uncommon for women to have that. And that was a great hurdle. And then the other hurdle was just thinking I was a better speaker than I was, and getting some bad reviews, and, initially going, well, that's a stupid audience, and then finally going, well, maybe there's, there's two scenarios here. There could be one great speaker and really stupid audiences, or maybe there's some good audiences and not such a good speaker. So I went and got some really good coaching and got over that. And I'm still getting coaching, every time I think you get a coach, you get what you can from them over time, and then it's time to move to the next coach at the next level, and so I'm still, now that I'm starting to do more keynotes, I'm reaching out for some advanced coaching, because that's a different animal. That's a more inspirational, shorter, and so, but I think those would be two things that I'm proud of. I'm a certified speaking professional, which is an earned designation through the National Speakers Association, and it was a 5-year process to get that designation. It was really hard work, and you have to be reviewed by your peers, by other CSPs, and you have to show a body of work. And getting that and walking across the stage and getting that was a big hurdle, and something I was really proud of. Yeah.
Congratulations. That is pretty amazing. Because death and taxes and speaking on stage are people's biggest fears, right?
Yeah.
So it's right up there with things most people don't want to do. So if you've accomplished that, it's a huge thing to work through.
Mm.
So do you have a secret pleasure or a dream that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, my secret pleasure is I'm a Texan, so I love Tex-Mex food, in particular white queso with really good chips and a margarita. I got to tell you, that's my secret pleasure. And it's a good thing I don't live in Texas anymore. I'd be 500 pounds. But a dream, I think, I'm 65 this summer, and over the next 10 years, I would really love to make a significant mark, however that comes, if it's with the book, if it's with presentations, if it's with coaching, I don't really know the avenues, but I really want to make an impact on how managers, owners, leaders, and professionals and people communicate in conflict, that I'm able to give a new frame to what conflict really is, that it's not a bad thing, that it can be a good thing. It can be an opportunity to bridge gaps and to bring people together. And I really, my dream is that by the time I retire, or if I ever do, however that ends, that I didn't become a star. That's not what I'm after, but that people say, I really got that from her. Like, I get it, and I'm applying it in my life. My relationships are better. I'm leading people better. Like, I'd love for that to live on and really make a difference. That's the dream for me.
Great dream. I think you will accomplish it hands down, no problem, because people need to understand how. Yeah, they do. They really need to understand how to have these tough conversations, and avoiding them just makes it 10 times worse. It's better to nip it in the bud and just deal with it than to let it fester and grow. And when a pimple starts out small, it grows into. I know, bad analogy, but it just gets the point across.
Yeah, and I just want. Not only does it worsen when we avoid it because we think it's bad or we think it won't go well. And we have lots of evidence in our past, usually, because we didn't do it well and it didn't go well. And so, of course, we think that. That's what I'm trying to change. I'm trying to change how we feel about it. And then I'm trying to change how it lands. And that people, that we see it as an opportunity to not just resolve something, but to resolve it in a way that the other person feels uplifted and feels not judged and inspired. I've been training people to use the word invite instead of demand. Stop demanding anything. Just get it out of your vocabulary. Just invite them in. They are grown professionals. They have a choice. Remind them that they're not a victim. I'm not. If you do not want to be at work at 7:45, you do not have to. Maybe that interferes with the kind of mother or father that you want to be. And I admire that and I respect it. And I need you here. If you choose to work with us, you must find a way to be the mother you want to be and to be here at 7:45. I'm inviting you into that. I want you here. I want you to do it. The invitation is open. Whether you choose to do it or not will be totally up to you. And I will do anything I can to support whatever decision you make. And you have to make a decision. And so, it's like, how do we honor them instead of thinking that we have to beat them into submission and so that's the kind of thing we're teaching. It's radically different than most people think. And it can be incredibly empowering. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. How about a personal motto or mantra that you live by every day?
Well, one of my favorite quotes is from Dr. Sue Morter, and she says, life is hard until it isn't. And it's one of my favorite quotes because what she's saying is, life is always going to throw every single one of us. It's life. It's going to throw hills and valleys and ups and downs and things that we are devastating. And that's just the journey. And all of that is hard until it's not, until the new frame says, this is what I signed up for on this planet. there's beauty in the valley as much as the top of the mountain. And it's all a growing learning experience. And I'm embracing whatever is before me. And I decide the definition of it. I decide how to interact with it and react to it. And so I think for me, it is, life's not happening to me. I'm happening to my life. I'm deciding. I'm never in the victim role.
That is great advice. I can't thank you enough, Katherine, for being here with us and sharing your story. I cannot wait for the book to come out. So if people want to get in touch with you, where do they reach out to you? And I'm sure you're on social media, so share all your details, and be happy to post it below the podcast when it airs.
Well, I can't tell you how much fun this has been. Just this great open conversation. You're really good at it, MJ. So I hope you'll keep this going. This is awesome. Thank you for having me. And yes, if you would love to chat with anyone who wants to learn more about what we do, my company is Lion Speak, Lion Speak.net. And so you can go there. info@lionspeak.net will reach me. And our phone number is 800-595-7060. And I would love to offer your listeners a free resource. If I'll send you a link for the show notes, or you can shoot us an email. But we have a one-page, we call it our Courageous Conversations support sheet. And it's this beautifully graphically designed little poster, if you will. And on the left, it has like a mindset piece. On the right, it has the 4-step framework for having a really great conversation. And it has 2 little rules of engagement down at the bottom. And I encourage people to print it out, put it on, bring it to a team meeting, talk to your teammates about it. Print it out and put it in your bulletin board at home and talk to your kids about it. That frame, getting that out so that people see that there are tools that can help them do better. I'd love to share that. It's a free resource, and I'd love to share it. So I'll make sure that we send you a link where they can get that for free.
I think that's outstanding, and I'll definitely go below the show in the show notes. So thank you so much for the offer. We really appreciate it. All right, Katherine, have a great day. Thank you so much for listening to the Women in Dentistry podcast with Dr. MJ Hanlon. If you like our show and want to know more about us, check out our website, thewomenindentistry.com, or please leave us a review on iTunes. Join us for our next episode as we bring you another amazing woman leading the way for the next generation.